Okay, well, in today's workshop, we're going to be learning how to ferment vegetables. But before we get into the specific methods and techniques for doing that, I'd like to just address the broader question: what is fermentation anyway? How does it transform food? And why might you be interested in it? Broadly speaking, fermentation is the transformative action of microorganisms. Any biologists listening to this are already shaking their heads, because for a biologist, fermentation means something a little bit more specific and also a little bit broader. For a biologist, fermentation means anaerobic metabolism, the production of energy without oxygen. And actually, the cells of our bodies are capable of fermentation. Most of the foods and beverages that we describe as fermented meet the biologist's criteria. They're anaerobic. When we turn cabbage or other vegetables into sauerkraut, that's an anaerobic process that does not require oxygen. When we turn milk into yogurt, that's an anaerobic process that does not require oxygen. When we turn grapes into wine, that's an anaerobic process that does not require oxygen. The problem with this definition from a food and beverage standpoint is that there are a large handful of foods and beverages that people think of as fermented that do require oxygen. Some examples of this would be kombucha, vinegar, tempeh, the Indonesian style of fermented soybeans, any kind of a cheese that involves molds need oxygen. So I think of these as the oxymoronic ferments. So rather than working with the biologist's strict definition, I prefer to work with this broader lay definition that fermentation is the transformative action of microorganisms. But of course, not every transformative action of microorganisms results in something delicious that we want to eat. All of us have experience with the transformative action of microorganisms when we clean our refrigerators and our pantries, and those sort of old things that have started decomposing in the far reaches of the refrigerator. That's also the transformative action of microorganisms, but we don't call that fermentation. We call that spoilage or rotting. So we have a different vocabulary, and we reserve the word fermentation to describe desirable or intentional microbial transformations. What we now understand, thanks to the science of microbiology, is that all of the things that make up our food, all of the plants and all of the animal products that people eat, are populated by elaborate communities of microorganisms. So there's a certain inevitability to microbial transformation of our food. And what we find in the back of our refrigerators is sort of one possible scenario of what can happen. But in culinary traditions in every part of the world, people observed how environment affects how food changes over time. And so, as I mentioned, all foods are host to elaborate communities of microorganisms. And so, the methods of fermentation amount to manipulations of environmental conditions so as to encourage the growth of certain organisms and simultaneously discourage the growth of other kinds of organisms. So that rather than our food decomposing into a disgusting mess that nobody would ever want to put into their mouths, we harness this, invisible life force that's part of everything that we eat in order to derive various practical benefits, in order to preserve food, to extend its useful life, in order to make foods more easily digestible, in order to make foods more delicious. So there's always some sort of a practical benefit to the fermentation.